Hey friends, I'm Steve and welcome to episode 3 of the Curious Friends podcast, where certainty is overrated and discovery is essential. We are glad you're here. I'm glad you're here. Make sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and subscribe to us on YouTube so you can get notified when any new content comes out on this channel. We'd also love to hear from you. So you can do that by sending a DM through any of those social channels or emailing us at curiousfriendspodcast@discovery.church. In today's episode, Greg and Jason join Rowland Smith, who is with Pando Collective, Forge America, Pulpit Rock Church. He also teaches at Fuller Seminary, but don't let that intimidate you or scare you off. Rowland's a really down-to-earth guy, and I think you're going to really like him. What they're going to talk about today is what does the church, the capital C church, look like in a post-COVID and post-Christian world, to be honest. That looks very different than it did a few years ago. And I think you're going to really enjoy this conversation. So without any further ado, let's get into this.
Well, hey, friends, we are so glad that you are joining us on this podcast for today. I'm really excited about this one. And the story of this is we're doing an event tonight with Pando Collective. And we're a couple hours out from this event. And we're like, man, we've got the Rowland Smith here with us. And we're just like, man, let's have a conversation. Let's sit down. And so before we go any further, I'd love to kind of have you introduce yourself. And Greg, you introduce yourself. My name's Jason. I'm one of the pastors at Discovery Church, but also love to work in our community, love our city, and that's enough about me.
I'm Greg. I'm another one of the pastors at Discovery Church. And then there's Rowland.
And that's it. And there's the Rowland Smith.
The Rowland Smith, the one and only.
Yeah. I don't know what that means. That's kind of ominous. The Rowland Smith. I'm in Colorado Springs, married, 4 adult kids. I'm on staff at Pulpit Rock Church. And we've launched this thing, which we're going to get to and talk about, the Pando Collective. And we're real into church outside the walls. So that's kind of my job at Pulpit Rock. And then also, I'm in an organization called Forge America and help give leadership to that nationally. And then teach a little bit at Fuller Seminary too. So that's what I spend my time doing.
Yeah, and what we actually have just the rest of our time talking about all your titles and all the things that you do now.
You should see my email list. People look at like how many emails I have, and they're just like, "How do you do this?" You know. So
that's why he's the Rowland Smith.
I know that the isn't ominous. It just kind of brings it all into one.
Yes.
Well, thanks.
Yeah. Thanks. Well, hey, we're about to do this event here called Pando Collective. Would love to hear about that. But there's a genesis of how that all got started.
Yeah.
Of how especially you two met. I'm the latecomer to the conversation that started a while ago.
Right.
And I would love to know, we'll get to what is Pando Collective, but how did you two meet? Greg, how'd you guys meet? What was going on?
Well, I think the initial meeting that I remember, correct me if I'm wrong, Rowland, was, Rowland was doing a missional coffee shop here called Third Space in Colorado Springs. And we had a mutual friend who said, hey, you got to meet this guy. And so it was over coffee one morning, and we talked in a big picture sense about what it means to be missional and all of that. And honestly, at the time, I was pretty caught up in what we were doing at Discovery and pretty caught up in the weekend experience. And I think it was in that conversation, Rowland, where you told me that one of the first things that you did when you came to Pulpit to help with worship, to give some direction to worship, was kill the fog machines.
Yeah,
if I remember that correctly. Yeah. If I remember correctly, I was like,
and I know that you use fog machines still.
And you
so
still told
I'm
me
not
that.
Against them.
Yeah, I know. And I thought to myself, I don't think I'm going to like this guy. Fast forward, Rowland's daughter-in-law, Corey, man, she is the engine behind our citywide movement here called Cause I Love You, COS I Love You. And so I'm really close to Corey. I'm on the board there, so I work really closely with Corey, and we are good friends. And she's a good friend of not only Pulpit, where she does some worship leading, but she's a good friend of Discovery too, and of our staff team here. And so I've known a lot about Rowland, but really what brought all this to be was we were at the grand opening for Springs Rescue Mission and their campus expansion. The mayor was there, and Rowland and I are standing next to each other in the crowd. I don't remember exactly how the conversation started, but it was something along the lines of, man, I've been reading a lot about, what is a church supposed to be? What's it look like? And it's disrupting me. And Rowland, my memory is, said something like, man, I'd love to get together and talk about that because, we're doing a lot of stuff with that. And so that's really what got it going. And then God just put it on my heart one day, reach out to Rowland. And so I did, and we got together.
Yeah, a couple times.
Yep. May or may not drink some beverages.
We supported a local business.
Yes, we did. Because
a local
we are
distillery.
Because that's our heart. That's our
right.
that's
How much support?
Yeah. It was
not too much.
No,
Okay,
not too
okay,
much.
all right,
No.
Yeah.
It wasn't sinful. It was yeah.
But it was great conversations. I remember because I had my little remarkable tablet, and we were able to draw pictures and kind of talk about concepts and God and mission and ecclesiology and church, and just kind of like how does all this stuff fit together. The disruption Greg was kind of feeling and had been on. I'm still on today, and maybe had just started a little earlier than Greg.
Yeah.
And Jonathan, our lead pastor, has been on it, and our team. It's just like it was kind of a perfect storm of things that were just kind of coming together. And I really feel like, a lot of people say, well, kind of God brought this together, made it happen. And I really do feel like he kind of helped these relationships kind of come together. Yeah. And we've got, there's some exciting stuff coming out of it. I am pumped about.
Yeah, there's
the next
exciting
year or so.
stuff coming up. Really remarkable places where God is bringing the right people together, going through some of the same deconstruction stuff, which has led you in a lot of ways to Pando Collective. And I, first time I heard that, I was like, great, we're going to get some Chinese food at Panda Express.
Exactly. Yeah, I was confused too.
Yeah. And so, and we're about to have a group of people come together, and it's a networking event. But I would love to hear from you along your deconstruction path, Rowland. You arrived at Pando Collective. How'd you get there, and what is it?
So this is like 50 minutes long total, right?
Yeah.
So,
Well,
it's just like this is a long journey.
We need
but
Cliff Notes version.
we need Cliff Notes. First, just a little bit of my own posture, just real quickly. I didn't grow up in church, and so my childhood, teen years, even into my 20s, I came with a perspective not of church, or I don't want to say the baggage of church, but the traditions of church, And so even when I went into ministry, I've still carried this kind of pre-believer understanding of life and what people are going through and living in. And so I've always felt like I kind of have a foot inside the church or the institution of church and a foot outside the church, which is kind of where I found my missional footing, right? And so I've lived really comfortably, like as a worship pastor on staff at big churches, and then doing a house group of, really edgy people that would never walk into church. And so my wife, Kitty, and I, our ministry has looked like that. Kind of what goes on at home is not necessarily what's happening in the building always. And so that as I got older, went to Fuller, studied missiology, met some great people, like Alan Hirsch and Mike Frost, and people. God really blessed me with some mentors that helped me accelerate that vision of what we feel like the church should be holistically, and even more importantly, what disciples of Jesus should look like, what learners of Jesus should look like. And so that's led to a framework of, that we often term missional. And I think sometimes the average person going to a church, missional, missions, those kind of words, they've kind of learned that those things are for special people that kind of go overseas, and our job is to support them financially, And I'm all for missions overseas, but our message is that really everyone that's a follower of Jesus is a missionary, an everyday missionary. So all those words mean the same thing. One's an adjective, one's a verb, So missions, missional. If something's missional, it's just participating in God's mission. And so a church should be missional in everything that it does. It should gather, it should worship, it should hear great teaching, it should break bread together and communion and do all the things that it does as a community. But then all of those people should understand themselves as everyday missionaries in the places they live, work, and play. So that's kind of, that's a really quick version of kind of the framework that I've gotten to, and that eventually led to meeting the people at Pulpit Rock Church. And, when I opened Third Space Coffee, I was really reacting to the institutional church. And I had gotten caught up in the weekend event, and I didn't want anything else to do with it. And so we actually left a church in a pretty good position and opened Third Space, planted a very small church community with it. And I had no plans of ever stepping back inside a church.
Yeah. And man, at some point along that journey, y'all meet, and Greg, you have mentioned your discontentment with the weekend experience, where it still absolutely serves a place. I think we can all agree the weekend experience is important. We've seen amazing things happen, but it is not the church. And so you meet, and talk to me about some of your discontentment with just the weekend experience. Not but just the weekend experience.
Well, honestly, I think that if Rowland and I had met or had tried to have this conversation even 2 years before we actually did, I don't know that I was ready for it. But because of the journey that God had me on individually, totally independent of Rowland and what Pulpit is doing. I've known Jonathan, I knew Thomas at Pulpit before that. We're friends. But for me, it was the pinnacle was the end of 2017. And our biggest weekend we'd ever have, almost 3,000 people. We almost broke 3,000. And I remember how that felt good for, 20 seconds. And it was like, oh no. For the first time in my life, I was like, this is not it. And it put us on a journey as a church. And Jay, you were here. So I was like, we're going to start challenging people more. And we did. And we started to lose people. Yeah. So, prior to the thing that we know as COVID hit, we were already in decline because we weren't de-emphasizing the weekend experience at that point, but we were certainly challenging people more. So still a safe place, regardless of how your story reads, but you're going to be challenged. What does it really mean to take up your cross and follow Jesus? And so we started to do that. So we were already in decline before COVID hit, and then COVID hits, and the church is where the church is today. But the thing that happened to me is I had a friend hand me a book before COVID while I'm on this journey that really disrupted me. And it's the story of a church that went from mega church to, they said it needs to be about multiplication, disciples making disciples. And something about that inside of me, I knew it was right. I was scared of it. I started to read about what happened in this particular church, and they blew up their weekend experience. In a big church of 10,000 plus people, grew to 600 over the course of time. But the weekend experience got totally blown up and recreated to be something different. And that really freaked me out. And it wasn't just because I was trying to hold on to this sacred cow that we call the weekend experience. I really believe in what we do here on the weekends. I think we create a safe space for people, regardless of what they believe, how their stories read, and they feel comfortable. A good place to bump into and experience Jesus for themselves. And so I'm still sold out on what we do on the weekend, but it started to really challenge me on the front of, okay, we're challenging people to take up their crosses, but are we multiplying, or is this all about addition? Is it all about the weekend and making the weekend service bigger? And what I realized was I've spent years working hard, and we've created exactly that. And so started reading more books on disciple-making movements and what God is doing in other parts of the world with people just living out their faith, where they live, learn, work, and play. and then stumbled across a book called Spent Matches by Roy Moran. And as you know, Roy's a friend now. We really believe in discovery groups and what he does, and it's easy for people to live their faith where they live, learn, work, and play. But there was another piece of this that I still felt like we were missing. I didn't really know how to identify it until Rowland and I started to have a conversation. And what he's doing with Pando and coming along and equipping and empowering people that are the church to be an expression of the church in a bunch of different ways that looks far different than what we do on the weekend. And honestly, the thing that really drew me to Rowland was, unfortunately, this camp, and it may not be a fair statement, but it's been my experience that it's an either or. It's an either or perspective. You know, that there's no both and mentality, that the weekend experience can serve its purpose, but we can't say that's the church. We can't say it's just about that, nor should we say, and although I've said it for most of my life, that's the main thing. But I didn't get that. I didn't get that from Rowland. I got both and, right? He didn't come at it from, and some guys in the extremes of both of these camps come at it that way. But with Rowland, it wasn't like he's coming to me and saying, I mean, to this point, and it may come in the future, but he's not asked us to take out our fog machines. So, I mean, maybe that's the bait and switch.
While I'm here tonight, they may disappear. But you didn't hear that.
Hey, just prepare Ben for Sunday when he comes in. It's just like, where's the fog machine? Where's
Roland's
the hazer?
got a plan.
Where's the hazer? Yeah, Roland's always up to something. But anyway, that really drew me to Rowland. And I had already started to read some of Alan Hirsch's stuff. And so Forge was not a foreign concept to me. And there was a lot of that was really resonating with what God was doing in my life and story. And so I feel like we have already been on a deconstruction journey here at DCC. Yeah. And it wasn't deconstruction to the extent that, okay, killing the weekend, that's going to be about group time or telling stories or whatever. But the mentality that the weekend experience is what it is most about. We had already been taking steps, and now I feel like this gives us a way to have a very well-rounded approach to helping people truly live out. We're all a sent people, and what's it look like to live that out in our lives and stories every day? Rowland's way down the field on that, further than we are, and so for us to be able to come alongside of what Pulpit Rock is doing, it just seemed to be, I mean, it just seemed, you can't make this stuff up. I mean, it's like Rowland said, God was doing something, and we got together, and here we are.
Yeah, and I think your statement about kind of the missional camp being either or in the past, that's fair. I think it's a fair statement, and I'm not sure why it has to be that way, except that the institutional pull on pastors, like when you get, and you know this better than anyone, I haven't been a lead pastor ever, except for that little group in the coffee shop. But when you start getting that pull of the building and, bills, and you've got people you're employing and families you're caring for and all that, it is such a big pull that mission becomes really, really scary, because you are de-emphasizing Sunday morning as the thing that solves everything. Right. The pulpit no longer solves everything. Right. And so that becomes a risk, right? Right. And so I think that's probably why the either or. But post-COVID, my experience, I talked to pastors all around the country. I was just at a Nazarene conference speaking, and I mean, lead pastors everywhere are trying to figure out, what do we do now? Because people have learned new rhythms. Believers have learned new rhythms. No doubt. Where they say, man, I want to be part of a community, but I'm going to be there, once or twice a month, and I'm going to be in my neighborhood and watch things online. And so we are in a season that's going to force these kind of conversations, and I think it needs to be both and. I mean, it's Jesus' church. It's not up to us to decide what goes and what stays. He will do that. Here's the shift, I think, maybe that will help people kind of understand it. And Thomas Thompson said something. It was pre-COVID, where he gave an illustration of the Sunday gathering as halftime instead of the end of the game.
I love that.
Now, it seems like a really simple kind of metaphor or picture, but if you think about it, if the Sunday gathering is halftime, that's where players go in the locker room, the coach gets with them, they take a rest, they re-energize, they remember who they are, why they're there, what their identity is, all these great metaphors of what we do too.
Exactly.
And then they're sent back out to play the second half. And so if you look at Sunday as halftime, then it's very different than saying, okay, I've arrived at Sunday morning, heard something, I was inspired, I learned something new, and now I can check my faith journey box.
Right.
And so, that changes the church from being attractional to Sunday morning to being more of a sending organization, and that's all we're trying to do, whether it's a big church or a small church,
For me, a part of the difference, because I think that as a church, Discovery, early on, we said we need to care about our city. And so when I got here 14 years ago, we didn't even have missions giving, and that had to change. That's a whole long story that we don't have time for. But when we did start to have mission partners, the majority of our mission partners are local. They're in the city. And being a part of starting Because I Love You, a citywide movement, I think we've done a pretty good job of helping our people understand you're a sent people, and we could get them to go and be sent to do a specific project or to help a specific organization. The disruption that came for me, because that had been in play for years, and I think we were known for that in the city and in the community. The thing that came into play for me and the disruption that happened to me is there's more to it than just that. And this whole idea of living out your faith, where that all of us are sent, and we're sent to be disciples who make disciples.
Right.
And I even look at my own life. I say, how well have I done that? In some ways, I've been given an easy ticket because I get to do it from a stage. But how well do I live this stuff out? It's really challenged me, with my neighbors and my unchurched friends, which I have them, which is a good thing. But how am I really living this stuff out? So it was the next step into this, Rowland, when I met you, that I felt like you were really helping people explore and then take steps into that I felt like our people really needed. And it came alongside at the same time that we were starting discovery groups where people, not where we were feeding them people, but people were inviting their friends, their coworkers into and starting to have conversations about God and life.
Yeah.
So it was a really cool time when we came together in that. But that was the extra piece for us that I feel like we were missing. There was more to it than this, not just deploy people to do service projects in the city.
Which are not bad.
Right, they're not. They're great. We still do it.
Yeah, but can you, if part of a person's discipleship, which, we know just means learner.
Right.
They're just a learner of the way of Jesus, is to actually do things. And Sunday morning, we know, is more about hearing things and learning things, right? And so when we get something in our head that cannot be the finish line, that's not making disciples. That's inspiring disciples, but what are they doing with it? Now, some people do things with it, but it's the intentionality, it's including that intentionality in our rhythms. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, what does game time look like? If services, and I know that's a lofty question, that's a big one. If services, we're talking about the weekend services, the coach up, train up, hearing, learning, what should game time look like? And you're talking about living missionally. What does game time look like? I love that analogy, by the way.
Oh, I do too.
That'll preach all day.
Yeah.
I've mostly just been thinking about that over here, like, oh man, I could use that.
Yeah.
Well, I heard it before you, so don't.
Oh, okay. Well, I thought we were here together, but
I haven't used it yet.
And
so
he makes the preaching schedule.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, I mean, I think
I preach sooner than you do. Though,
I know you do.
Yeah, let me try to answer that using kind of Greg's framework, which I think is super helpful. In the past and in the present, but a lot of times churches that are larger, game time looks like the church is going to decide on a project or something we're going to do to love people. And it's great stuff. Mm-hmm. It's really good stuff. And we want all of you to go into that funnel and help us do this or financially do this. So I'm not saying that's bad.
Right.
We're not stopping that. Pulpit Rock's part of Because I Love You, and Discovery is we do these things as programs of the church as well. But if you don't teach people their own personal sentness, and we're kind of using John 20 here, Jesus says to the disciples, "As the Father sent me, so I send you." He was saying that to individuals, not just an organization, right? If we don't teach them their personal sentness, then we are actually discipling them to rely on the institution to navigate their faith. And so they kind of lose they don't get any muscle memory of how to live with their neighbors, how to live with their coworkers, how to engage their friends that are having marital issues, or the homeless that live on their street, or whatever it is. They don't know how to react to that. They don't know what to do with it.
Right.
It's like, well, my church has a program, and so so I think it's super important to teach people their own personal sentness, and then invite them also into the organizational sentness, because a church does have a mission, for the city. And so mission or game time looks different. Mm-hmm. And if you've got 2,000 people coming here, then it's 2,000 different games going on, Right. If it's 800 people at Pulpit Rock, it's 800 different games going on. And so my job becomes, and one reason we've started Pando Collective, we're kind of getting into this now, is how do we incubate, equip, send, and resource that many different stories? Because for a church staff to do one thing, like, okay, now it's time for City Serve. I mean, we know what that's like. It's like, okay, all hands on deck,
right.
Focus on it, But if you're trying to do 800 different stories and send people, then how do you curate that and help shepherd that and continue to disciple that? And so that's one reason for Pando Collective.
Yeah. What is Pando Collective? We talked about the disruption that led to the beginning of it, but when you say that,
Chinese
what does it mean?
food.
Chinese food,
Yeah,
okay.
it is.
It's Panda Bears at the Express.
When you said that, it just hit me. We're having dessert tonight. We should have had Chinese food.
Big miss.
Yeah, big miss. So Pando, let's just get the confusion out of the way. Pando, P-A-N-D-O, is a Latin word, and it literally means I spread out. Pando, the trembling giant, is the largest living organism on Earth. And it is about 6 hours from where we're sitting here in Colorado. And it's an aspen grove in Utah, in Fish Lake National Forest. And I got to go there 2 years ago and film some videos and stuff right at the height of the leaves falling, and it's yellow. Beautiful. And you come over the hilltop into Fish Lake, and you see 55,000 aspen trees, all kind of spread out in this valley floor and going up the mountainsides, next to this lake, and it's an awesome sight. What you don't realize when you're looking at the external of all these aspens is that they are all one tree, and so they're all connected by one root system. And scientists have actually DNA tested trees on edges of it, and they're the same. And so it's by weight, they're just estimating with the weight and the size and everything, it's the largest organism on earth. And, kind of counter that to maybe an oak tree. An oak tree is also beautiful, majestic. I grew up in the South. We had big oak trees. But I remember as a kid mowing our yard, we had 2 huge oak trees. And I hated mowing the front yard because it was so dusty, because stuff didn't grow around the oak trees, because the root systems just like suck the nutrients out of the ground because they need it for this huge structure. And perhaps that's a metaphor for what we were doing during kind of church growth days.
Sure.
Weekend, where we're kind of caught on the weekend expression. Sure. So you got to support all these programs and all these things. And so we believe Pando's is a perfect metaphor for the kingdom and for the church, because it is constantly spreading out. There are older trees they actually send nutrients to younger trees that are starting. If you walk through Pando, you'll see trees that are dying or are dead, laying there, and they've died, and little shoots coming up all over the place. And so there's new things starting as old things are kind of passing away. And isn't that the church and the kingdom and how God works? And so
should be.
Yeah. So Pando Collective is like, we hope, this Aspen Grove that we've kind of launched outside the walls of Pulpit Rock. And it's meant to be kind of a wild and crazy incubating laboratory where people that get this missional impulse, they kind of start understanding their sentness and God's calling them to do something. Oftentimes they can't find a place in the church to really launch that because it's not a church program, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So it's their individual calling. And so we can bring these people together in one group and in one community to support each other, love on each other, be like a church community together. Pulpit we've put some money into this, and so we do things like kingdom grants, where we've had people with organizations or things they want to start, and we're able to put some financing behind it, because oftentimes that's one of the holdbacks. Or we can do some coaching or some leadership stuff. And it brings a synergy between people that previously didn't know each other, and maybe they were just kind of out doing their own thing. Mm-hmm. So it started as just a way for us to network people that are not connected with churches necessarily, or they're part of a church community, but what they're doing is not part of their particular church.
Yeah.
But now we're coming into a really exciting season, because when Greg and I started talking, and we've had experience as 2 churches, Discovery and Pulpit Rock, working alongside each other with Cause I Love You, with service projects, to say, well, man, if churches can work together like that, what would it look like for 2 churches to be like lever points for missional discipleship and engagement in the city? And, can we hold our people, I'm using air quotes here on the podcast, but our people, they're not our people, but can we hold what God's given us loosely enough to allow Him to multiply the missional work that we want to do and that we feel called to do? And it's led to some pretty exciting conversation and plans too.
Rowland, did you start Pando before COVID? Did the official launch happen?
Well,
I thought it did.
The official, it kind of. So I always tell people I'm a little bit like Elon Musk in that I had a few rocket ships try to blast off, but then they crashed. So so I was, we kind of started Pando probably 3 times.
Okay.
And I don't think that it was wrong. It's just you're always trying to figure out what, where's God at work and how can I join Him in what He's already doing. You know, we don't create mission.
So
it's
good.
already God's mission. I mean, it's just Missio Dei theology.
Sure.
And so I'm like highly apostolic in a 7 Enneagram and stuff. So I'm like, you know, ready, shoot, aim sometimes. And, but God, you know, is patient with me. And so we've had some great experimenting with Pando, and I think that has helped kind of solidify what it isn't,
Right.
and then what it needs to be. I really do feel like some of the conversation that we're on now,
Right.
with really 4 different churches now,
Right.
instead of just, but what started with you and I, and it has now kind of multiplied. This is really something new that I'm not seeing in the country, even in my work with Forge and Fuller, you know. And not to pat us on the back, but
Right.
it's just exciting work, you know, to just say, okay, what if churches could work together and actually disperse the church,
Right.
not attract the church to a service? What if our metrics became kingdom expansion instead of, you know, butts in the seats? I still think people will come to weekend expressions, maybe even more. I still think those metrics will follow,
Sure.
but then that doesn't become our target.
Right.
Our target becomes participating with God and His kingdom in Colorado Springs and doing it together.
Right.
You know?
You know, the reason I asked the question why when you started was because you said something that made me think, because this has been the journey that God has had us on, is holding it loosely.
Yeah.
It's not our nature. It's not what we default to. And I think God used COVID to really help us with that. You know, you better hold this thing loosely because tomorrow it may not look like what it looked like yesterday.
Right.
And so us holding it, I want to commend you. I'm trying to get to a compliment here. I want to commend you for starting this thing and for allowing God to stir this stuff up before COVID, because honestly, a part of I felt like God was saying to us, hold this loosely. It's not about you. It's not about this weekend experience. It goes all the way back to the end of 2017 when I was disrupted by a big crowd, but something's wrong. So he started to, but I feel like with me, a lot of this journey has been God prying my fingers off of it. So
a good
we're learning to hold it loosely.
Yeah.
But I just want to commend you because I think you guys, and you particularly, you guys have gotten there before we did, and we're getting there. But it's not something that is easy to do.
Well, no, it's not. And we haven't arrived. I mean, I still lead worship once in a while and preach once in a while. And I mean, it's, you know, it's weird post-COVID standing up there and, you know, the room's like half full.
Yeah.
When you're used to a bunch of people. And so, you know, there's a tug on us for success.
Yeah.
And there's also a healthy tug of we want this ministry to be sustainable. This thing that God started called Discovery, or this thing that God started, I don't know, back in 1940 or something, Pulpit Rock Church, you know, we want it to be sustainable.
Right.
But then you also want to send people
Right.
into the community. And so it is a reality. And this is the hard conversation for pastors everywhere, you know, because they've learned to build businesses, not communities of some people.
That's good.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. That's good. And you said something earlier that I think is super relevant. You said, where is God at work? You know, we ask. And it reminds me of something that our friend, you mentioned, Roy.
Yep.
He said, you know, the question isn't what can I do? It's what needs to be done.
Right.
Did I say that right?
Mm-hmm.
And I just think you're asking the right question. And I mean, that's a corporate level church world. That's also a personal level for anybody who may be watching or listening. And if you're watching, I'm sorry, because you got to look at this the whole time.
Yeah.
But you know, that's such a good question for each of us to carry with us. What can I do versus what needs to be done?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and that, you know, that comes from, you know, I don't want to get too seminary on people, but I mean, it comes to the early 1900s. This kind of question started being asked at some, you know, big world conferences and stuff, and then some people started writing about it, some missiologists and theologians, and and basically, if you think about, the 1800s, is a big missionary explosion that was starting to happen, from the West to, more needy countries and people, and but it looked a little colonizing, in that, we were not only were people in the West, Europe and Americas and stuff like that, like actually making people look like us, but there was this thought process of I'm carrying the gospel and I'm carrying God's mission to a place where it's absent. And it's almost like we looked at these places as it's void of God. But what we don't remember is that these people were imago Dei, images of God. I mean, we know that from Genesis 1. We're all made in the image of God. And it's God's creation, and it's His world, it's His work. And if we really believe in God's omniscience and all of those things, then we understand God's at work all the time. And as missionaries, what we do is look for a way to participate in that mission. And from the time I learned that, which I did learn from Alan Hirsch, but from reading his books, but then when I was in seminary, Leslie Newbegin and David Bosch and all these, there were people writing about it going back. It just opened up my eyes. And so now, if I see someone or see a situation that doesn't look like the kingdom, my thought is not the kingdom is absent. My question becomes, how are you working in this, God, and how can I help you make this look more like the kingdom? How can I participate in that? So that takes me out of my kind of power role, as someone that's white, middle class, whatever, carrying something to someone else that they need it. No, it's really just becomes loving your neighbor, and it's a picture of the Good Samaritan,
right.
in that story that Jesus tells, where you just stop and love your neighbor, and you participate in the kingdom in that way. So,
yeah. As you're talking about that 1900 and all that stuff, I'm thinking about things that we've talked about where, and you've even said this from stage, where from the outside looking in, it can look like the church is failing. I think it was a couple weeks ago, maybe a couple months ago now, that you said that it's for the first time ever less than 50%. It's 49% of America would say we believe in God. And so there's obviously disruption.
And let me interrupt you, because that's that Gallup stat that came out. I don't know if you realize that includes Christians, Muslims, and Catholics.
Wow. So religious of any.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, 49% identified as religious.
Religious at all.
And that includes even non-Christian,
religion,
faiths.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I mean, that even paints a fuller picture, because our churches are half of what they used to be. Mm-hmm. I think God's taken His church back, and so but there's a hurdle there, not just for the church leaders, but for people who God would be calling up and into, or who we'd be working with. What's the hurdle for people? You know what I'm saying? Like, what's the hurdle to get there? I think there's this, and part of my answer is, I think there's always been a voice of disqualification. Well, I'm not a good communicator. I'm not a good this kind of leader. I think the church has been really designed to elevate people who talk good. All right? And so and I think you talk about it in like this, what is it? Shepherds, teachers.
APES, yeah.
The
Apostles,
APES.
Prophets, evangelists, shepherds, teachers,
Yeah. And so what does that mean? What does that word APES mean, or that abbreviation?
Well, I mean, it's just an acronym. It's in Ephesians 4, and it just talks, Jesus talks about, it's the gifts that Jesus leaves to the church, and it says for the equipping of the saints, that's believers, for the work of service. And so, the thought is that, as Jesus ascended and kind of left His role and left us as the sent people, He leaves these gifts giftings to the church. And there's a lot of debate on whether those are gifts for leadership or whether they're gifts for every person. I believe they're gifts for every person. I think every person is endowed with those, especially when the Holy Spirit indwells them. But it lists them as apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherds, teachers. So it lists those five. My personal belief is that those are the five. It's not like a for example list. And so, like my mentor Alan Hirsch, he teaches us a lot, and he even has like tests and things like that you can take to kind of try to key in on what you are. And so, I think that people, sometimes I think Gallup polls and things like that, there's obviously a margin of error. My organic experience is that people have or are leaving the church structure or methodology, Western methodology, but not so much leaving their faith or their spiritual interest or their belief in something bigger.
Yeah.
That, and we had a deconstruction group of 20-somethings that my wife and I did in our home this past spring, and that was very much my experience. Even though it seemed like people were kind of taking maybe a universalist stance or something, really the church had hurt them, or they weren't finding what they needed in their journey by just coming and being a participant on a Sunday and hearing someone talk. They were tired of singing songs, and so, but they would still say, because I would ask point blank, do you believe that there's a God that loves you? And the answer is always yes.
Yes. Yeah.
But that is playing out in different ways, right? And so I think we set up our churches for people to be not participants as much as they are watchers.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes.
It's set up like a theater, which I always get irritated. Even me having to stand on a stage, like I don't want to do it. I've seen some church sanctuaries where they set up a stage in the middle and everyone's sitting around, and the stage is really low and the band's on the floor with the people. And I think, yes, like this feels more like community. But unfortunately, we're in this culture where we have people that walk in, they sit down. It's like, okay, Greg, now tell me something I didn't know.
Feed me.
And it becomes like a cafeteria. It's a buffet,
Well, and to marry what you were talking about, Jason, the church, as we experience it in the Western world, the American church, has been built around two of the five.
Yeah.
Shepherds or pastors, if you want to call them that, and teachers. And if that's not you, if that's not your wiring, it's like, okay, what we've got for you is sit and listen, be an usher, work in kids ministry, serve up some coffee, set up chairs, but there's so if you think about just from the 3 out of 5, 60% of the kingdom, of people in the kingdom are being missed by the weekend expression of most churches.
And we have a saying that the apes, apostle, prophets, evangelists, these are normally the kind of edgy, we need to start this, we need to do this.
Right.
They don't find that in the church, and so we say the apes have left the building. Yeah, and it's true.
It is true.
And so these are the people that have been finding Pando. It's like, it's a place where I can have community, be on mission, and there's other people that understand me. We kind of call it a Freaks Like Me club, which I kind of got from Alan Briggs, but it really is,
Misfit toys kind of thing.
And the beauty of what we're talking about is that you're not just mining for those people in one church.
Right.
That now, what does it look like for 2 churches, for 4 churches, to have a place for those people to step up and into everything that God has created them to be?
Yes.
That may never serve your church, your institution, in a way that you can measure it. And it comes down to being okay with it.
And I would even say they may not show up on a weekend for the weekend gathering.
Right.
They may watch you online and still feel like part of your community.
Absolutely.
I mean, we have people that are doing that now at Pulpit. I mean, we're still in experimenting stages with all of this, but you got to be okay with that. You can't just count attendance
right.
as the metric for success. What becomes the metric for success is kingdom stories that are happening that your community is involved in. Yeah. So
before we leave this,
Rowland,
we're talking about this Pando, and we're going to have this gathering tonight. But can you give us a couple or one or two illustration of what does this look like? Because from my perspective, we kind of talked in the clouds at this point, up here, and practically speaking, boots on the ground. What does it look like for one of these apes to actually, we come alongside of them and help them? And I know you've got numerous examples of that, but just for people that are listening to this, who God's stirring something up in them, can we just point them to a couple of different ways that this expresses itself?
Well, and I think shepherds, teachers too. So
exactly.
So it's discipling the body of Christ to be sent, right? And so shepherd teachers may, match up with the apostolic friend, and they start something in their neighborhood or their workplace or whatever. So we've been kind of playing with and experimenting with a discipleship cohort at Pulpit Rock called Living Sent, original title, right? And it really is meant to, this disruption that you had and that I've had that kind of came along. It's meant to intentionally disrupt.
Yes.
And then to show them this identity, that we all have as followers of Christ, and then invite them into a process of discovering what that is. Like, how do you want to participate in the kingdom? How is God calling you to do it? And so it could be as simple as Kevin and Lydia Andrews, who do pancakes on the porch, and they're in our neighborhood, ironically on Corona Street. And in fact, we're doing one tomorrow morning. And like,
it's a weird combination.
I know.
Pancakes
and Coronas.
30 people will show up to this thing.
Awesome.
45.
It works in the summer.
And that leads to deeper relationship. They are almost pastors on their street.
That's awesome.
Even though they don't call themselves that.
Yeah. So would you see them, and just for illustration, would you see them more as shepherds? If you're looking at an apest, I mean, there's this apostolic thing, it feels like, that's in them. And I'm not trying to put them in a box.
Yeah.
But that shepherding piece of where they're shepherding and pastoring the
I
neighborhood.
definitely think they have a shepherding piece to them. And they will talk about the fear of starting something like that, because you put out all these flyers, and Lydia will say, "What if no one shows up?" The worst that'll happen is you freeze a bunch of pancakes. So there can be a fear to it. It could be as big as something where a couple wants to start a nonprofit for something that they've had a heartbeat for, the homeless or the poor, or girls in trafficking or whatever. And we want to help incubate and launch those things, not as a program of the church,
absolutely,
but as the church.
Right.
It is the church.
Exactly.
And so the dream is that, like, Discovery and Pulpit, and I think it's fair to go ahead and say to people, Eric, Dr. E over at Sanctuary is wanting to be part of this. And MJ's community, Jenna, wants to be part of it. And so, can churches come together, and maybe we do these cohorts even together? We're talking about, like, what if people mix together and go through a path where they discover their sentness, and then we start incubating and launching these things and telling stories about it. So
talk to me about. There's one example you gave me. You told me one time. I think it was about bunk beds.
Yeah, so we've had a ministry at Pulpit Rock that was started by Luke Wroblewski. He was our facilities guy. He's now leaving facilities, and he's just, his job is to run that thing.
Oh, that's great.
But we've built bunk beds. He and his team have built bunk beds for the foster care system. And we actually kicked the middle schoolers out of their worship room and set up a wood shop, which is like 20 feet from the worship center. So it's kind of fun. You can take a left and you go in a really nice worship center set up like a theater with lights and all this stuff. Or you can take a right and go where we also worship, which is a wood shop with a bunch of sawdust and saws and stuff. And so they build bunk beds for the foster care system. Luke's been around the world and helped set up other wood shops to do the same thing. We have another couple, the Beckers, I think you know, Pikes Peak Academy. They have a school for at-risk senior high students, high school students, to help them get to graduate school. And these are kids that are at risk for family issues or whatever. And well, I introduced Luke to the Beckers, and they're both part of Pando. And they start talking, and all of a sudden I found out, oh, okay, so Pikes Peak students they're busing them over to Love Your Neighbor, this bunk bed ministry, for wood shop.
That's great.
And some of these kids have been in foster care.
Right.
And so now you got kids that have come through the system in different ways or trouble, in life or on the street, building bunk beds for kids in the foster care system. And it's just like this beautiful circle of kingdom life where they start making that connection and they start, and they hear about the kingdom and hear about God from Luke, and they also hear about it from the Beckers. And so it is evangelism, but it's the kingdom and evangelism in a tangible way, not just a voice of here's what you should believe.
Yeah, and I love that because it's like I don't feel like I can preach, I can't teach. The whole Jesus conversation may wig me out, but I can do that.
Can you run a saw?
Yeah. That's a beautiful thing, man.
I love that. I love the picture image of that you're given. Greg, how do you see that? How do you see us releasing the radical or empowering people with ideas like never before in the context of, I know we have a lot of people from Discovery Church. I think there's going to be people from anywhere, but how do you see that playing out at Discovery?
Well, this conversation is one of many. We're just really getting started in this, but we're plugged into the Rowland Smith. So I mean, what else you need?
Wow.
It's going to be amazing. But he did say something that made me think about this idea of repurposing space. Which is a big part of our vision with City Hub, and we've got a big building that's a nice building on 10 acres that sits dark way too often. So how do we use our space for the community, for kingdom purposes beyond a Sunday morning event, which is, part of what we're dreaming about and heading into moving forward. So more to come on that.
Much, much more to come on that.
Yeah, and y'all need to take my pedestal down way low. I'm getting scared of heights. You keep saying the Rowland Smith.
No, it's still. I'm getting a T-shirt.
I can't tell you how excited I am about the future of this, and I feel like we've, sometimes you just kind of feel like you're in lockstep with what the Holy Spirit's doing. I mean, you're reading tea leaves, right? You're trying to, okay, God, is this what you're doing? And there just feels like a big kingdom thing.
It does to me too.
And at 60 years old, I mean, it's like, I want to give the rest of my life to this.
Yes.
I do.
Yes. Yeah. Exciting days ahead.
Very much so. Thank you so much for hanging out. I hope next time you join us, we'll have these black T-shirts with a silver circle of your head and then some little glasses.
It says the Rowland Smith.
Right
Rowland
above
Smith.
it, just the Rowland Smith.
I wonder if it's therowlandsmith.com. I bet I could get it.
I bet you could.
I bet I
URL.
can. I'm going to get
awesome.
therowlandsmith.com, and I'm going to get Steve's going to build a website.
Great.
It's going to be awesome.
Great.
Listen, this is the first of many. We're going to have Rowland back as this journey continues, and as we continue. We don't know what we're doing.
No.
We're all willing to admit
God
that.
does. Oh.
God does.
Right.
And it's going to develop and get cool, and we're going to learn from mistakes, but there's going to be a lot more to talk about moving forward. So thanks for being here with us, Rowland.
Yeah,
I really appreciate you.
Really glad to be here on Curious Friends. I'm still trying to figure out what makes me curious, but yeah.
I think we're all curious about a lot of stuff.
We are.
Okay, all right.
We're staying
I'm
curious.
Good.
And the moment we think we
have
think
the
we haven't
answers
figured out,
is when we're in trouble.
that's
Yeah,
for curiosity.
glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. All right.
Hey, thanks, guys. So, what is this conversation stirring up in you? Is God calling you into a life mission that goes beyond just attending church on a weekend? Are you ready to take the next step? What does that look like in your life? We'd love to hear about it. So please send us a DM on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or email us at curiousfriendspodcast@discovery.church. We want to thank Rowland for joining us. And if you want to learn more about Pando Collective or some of the other things that Rowland's involved with, you can find those links in the show notes. Please join us for our next episode with Greg Lindsey, who's the pastor right here at Discovery Church, as we talk about City Hub. You're probably wondering, what is City Hub? I like your curiosity. Well, you're just going to have to wait until the next episode. But seriously, it's something that we are really excited about here at Discovery Church. If you like this podcast, please share it with someone else. It's really important that you do that for us. Hey, thanks for joining us. And like always, stay curious, friends.